Hey everyone, it's Eric with FirearmTutorials.com, and I'm going to talk about the difference between the single action, double action trigger and the LEM. So I got a couple questions about this. Somebody wanted to see the actual triggers themselves, the actions, the resets, and the pulls. And then somebody else also asked, what are the pros and cons of each type of trigger. So I'll go over the trigger pulls here. With the traditional single action, double action, you've got a single action pull, which you've got a little bit of take up here, and then a very short and light break. Weapon cycles, here's the reset, take up the slack again, same exact pull you saw before. With the LEM, you've got a longer take up, but it's much smoother, or I should say lighter. There's very, very little resistance here. You can feel the trigger traveling, but it's nothing like a traditional double action trigger, which HK describes this configuration as a double action only. I don't necessarily agree with that. I kind of would characterize this as a single action trigger with a double action trigger distance, because you see how much it has to travel there to take up that slack. Now you see the actual, once you take up that slack, the actual amount that you need to break there is very, very similar to the single action you just saw. So once the shot breaks, weapon cycle, here's the reset, take up the slack, same thing. So it's very, very similar to the single action we just saw, but the trigger take up is just a little different. Now you'll notice that every time I flap this hammer, or flap the trigger, it operates the hammer. Now this is a bobbed hammer. There's no way to decock this unless you were to do one of these, which is not advised and not safe. So it's pretty much once you chamber it, you either fire it or you rack the slide and eject the round just like you would on a Glock or some other striker fired gun. So let's go ahead and try and compare these two single action pulls. So with the LEM on top, you see the hammer flapping with the trigger. Now this one, obviously the hammer stays back until the trigger breaks and the gun fires. So let's look at the take up here. Here's the take up on the bottom. This is single action, double action, and this is LEM. So you see they're very, very close, and then obviously once they break, it's very, very close trigger pull. So let's look at it in the double action mode of the Expert versus the LEM. So here you see the triggers look very similar right now as far as the distance that they have to travel before they break. Now you'll see this one, we've got this much creep until we run into some pretty positive resistance, which then operates the hammer. But you see here how much easier it is, and I'm left-handed too, so it would be even worse if my hands were reversed. But you see how much easier it is to operate the hammer and get into that single action-ish mode versus with the Expert, you've got a very long pull, and then it's a little harder to predict where it's going to break versus the LEM. Now the thing to notice about this is that if you were to carry a decocked, hardly ever do I fire this gun like this. And that's one of the things that I would say is a negative in respect to self-defense, is I technically do carry a USP in this configuration where it's round chambered but decocked. So if I have to fire it, it's going to be a long, heavier pull, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the same as the second shot. Whereas with the LEM, you're going to have a fairly long trigger pull, but it's light and the take up is easy. So the gun goes off, then the second shot is exactly the same as the first. So I'm seriously considering switching my carry gun to an LEM setup. Now, the only negative to this by some views would be the lack of a thumb safety, which can be accomplished with the LEM. So obviously this is the same kind of deal, an LEM trigger, but you still retain the manual safety. Now, there's no decock on here because there's, as I discussed before, there's really no way to decock it. So that's the difference. Pros and cons, I would say that in single action mode, this is a better target shooting gun, just because there's going to be a little less hand movement, or less room for hand movement when you have a shorter trigger pull. When you operate this very long trigger, you tend to move your hand just a little bit. So I'd say that's where the single action, double action trigger wins, is for precision, target shooting, competition shooting. It's definitely better for that. Not to say that you can't shoot the LEM just as accurately, because you can, but it's going to take a more advanced shooter to be able to do that versus a single action, double action trigger pull. So that's pretty much it, guys. I hope that answered your questions, and if you have any others, let me know, and thanks for watching.